Warm greetings and heartfelt salutations to Stories I Know. If you're new here, we warmly encourage you to subscribe to our channel and express your support for this video by giving it a thumbs up. In a mere heartbeat, we discover the spark that fuels our desire to craft even more enchanting stories. Please express your gratitude for this video, and now, let us dive into the story. Never did I foresee finding myself in such a predicament. In a charming little town, I devoted my early years to cultivating dreams of a life brimming with simplicity and happiness. In the vibrant days of our youth, I pledged my love to my college sweetheart, Jus, a bond crafted in the glow of our mutual dreams and hopes. Even with our limited belongings, the connection we nurtured was a priceless gem, and that was more than enough. That was the conclusion I had drawn. Looking back, the signs of what was to come have revealed themselves to me. In that fleeting moment, it was beyond my comprehension. As we stepped into the charming little house we had selected for our stay, I was delighted to encounter Mr. Thomas, our gracious landlord. The abode may not have boasted opulence, yet it encapsulated the very spirit of our connection. It exuded a delightful warmth, featuring a quaint garden and a charming little backyard that truly captured my heart. As we stepped into this new chapter of our lives, an exhilarating rush coursed through Jus and me, igniting a spark of anticipation for what lay ahead. Mr. Thomas was a gentleman of considerable experience, gracefully navigating the early chapters of his 6th decade. His face glowed with a comforting warmth, a smile that seemed to linger during each of our meetings. He was the kind of landlord who would make the occasional visit, checking in to ensure everything was in perfect order within the house. The memory lingers of that first visit when he came to repair the broken fence. He displayed an impressive level of courtesy, asking if we needed anything, while effortlessly weaving in light-hearted discussions about the changes the neighborhood had experienced over the years. In that moment, it hardly made an impression on me. He was simply a charming, older gentleman. Slowly, the currents started to change. As just professional obligations drew him away from home more often, I found myself increasingly navigating the serene solitude of our quiet abode. In these moments, I began to see Mr. Thomas through a fresh lens. He would arrive unannounced with a growing regularity, sometimes to assess the home, other times merely to share a few words. At first, I regarded it as harmless. In the end, he was the one who held the title of our landlord. As the days progressed, I began to notice a delicate shift in the cadence of our conversations. On a tranquil afternoon, while I nurtured the blooms in my backyard garden, Mr. Thomas arrived for an unanticipated visit. He began to come around more frequently, and although I welcomed his company, there was an unsettling aura to his visits that lingered in the back of my mind. His kindness enveloped me like a warm embrace, yet hidden beneath that facade was an intensity in his gaze that ignited a flicker of unease deep within my soul. On that particular afternoon, he stayed longer than usual, savoring the moment. Our dialogue flowed effortlessly, touching on the nuances of the weather, savoring the beauty of the garden, and ultimately exploring the profound complexities of existence. In those fleeting moments, I began to notice a captivating allure in his demeanor. "Is there a sense of happiness that envelopes you in this space?" he asked that day, his eyes fixed on me, igniting a feeling of vulnerability deep within. Doubt shrouded my reply. Indeed, there was a spark of happiness with Jus, but an unmistakable gap started to emerge, especially with his long hours at work. There were times when solitude wrapped around me, even with him in the house, yet I hesitated to share that reality with Mr. Thomas, not in plain sight. I gave a polite smile and a subtle nod, trying to brush the thought aside, but Mr. Thomas was relentless, determined to keep it alive. At times, he observed, "It is all too easy to underestimate the importance of having a confidant, to feel the authentic warmth of knowing that someone is genuinely listening." Words slipped through my fingers, but the way he spoke them sent a chilling shiver down my spine. His words lingered in the air, resonating long after he had left the scene. I brushed it aside, persuading myself that it was nothing more than a fleeting interaction. As Mr. Thomas continued to grace my company. I found myself noticing subtle shifts in his behavior. His compliments, once playful and effortless, began to carry a weight I had never experienced before. He would comment on my appearance, acknowledging the care I took in presenting myself and the diligent attention I devoted to maintaining the home. At first, I viewed his gestures as simple acts of kindness, but it soon became clear that he possessed an uncanny awareness of nuances that eluded those around him. On a certain evening, Jess was away, occupied with a business trip. On a serene evening, I settled comfortably on the couch, lost in the pages of a captivating book, when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Startled by the unforeseen arrival, I hesitated briefly before offering my reply. As I swung the door open, there stood Mr. Thomas, his smile radiant and inviting. "I just happened to be nearby," he said with a casual smile, so I thought I'd swing by and make sure everything was all right. I bestowed a polite smile, stepping back just enough to grant him passage. His unexpected appearances had settled into a familiar pattern, prompting little more than a passing consideration from me. He stepped into the living room, and our dialogue began, just as it always did. Yet on this occasion, an unexpected tension lingered in the air. His gaze possessed a disquieting intensity that sent a delightful shiver down my spine. It was nothing overt, just a fleeting look, an extended gaze, yet it was enough to set my heart racing wildly. In the course of our dialogue, Mr. Thomas drew closer to me than was his usual custom. The space that had kept us apart started to close, and the power of his presence became ever more palpable. I remember letting out a nervous laugh at his words, trying to brush away the growing discomfort that nestled in my heart. I comforted myself with the thought that his actions were simply expressions of camaraderie, persuading myself that my responses were overblown. As if sensing my discomfort, Mr. Thomas leaned in slightly, his hand gently resting on the arm of the couch. "You know," he said, "it's a rare thing to meet someone like you, someone who truly listens, someone who genuinely cares." At first glance, the words seemed innocuous, but there was an unsettling quality in his tone, a particular inflection that sent a shiver racing down my spine. A wave of unease washed over me, compelling me to pull away and voice my feelings, but I chose to keep my thoughts to myself. Instead, I released a nervous laugh and pulled my legs up to my chest, trying to create a barrier between us, even if it was just a physical one. Mr. Thomas noted the shift in my posture, and for a brief instant, an unvoiced tension lingered in the atmosphere surrounding us. He looked at me, his gaze soft, but there was an undeniable intensity that captivated my attention. "I never intended to make you feel uneasy," he murmured, his voice soft and low. "Your appreciation is genuinely cherished. Mary, you embody a distinctive and extraordinary charm." The way he spoke my name took my breath away for a fleeting moment. My heart raced in my chest, rendering me utterly speechless. I longed to speak, to break the heavy silence that enveloped us, but the perfect words remained just out of reach. In that moment, I was captivated, held in place by the very essence of time. Before I could even speak, Mr. Thomas stood up, commanding the room with his presence. With a smile gracing his lips once more, he said, "I suppose I should allow you to return to your evening." Yet, there remained a peculiar charm in the smile, an enigmatic quality that eluded my comprehension. "I wanted to connect and inquire about how you've been faring lately." I nodded, my throat dry, watching him as he left the house. As the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled a breath I hadn't known I was holding. I sat still, my eyes locked on the door, as time elongated into an endless expanse, wrestling with the perplexing occurrences that had just transpired. Never before had I encountered such a deep and tumultuous conflict within myself. A part of me longed to share my inner turmoil with Jess, while another part was held captive by shame, paralyzed by the fear of how he might perceive me. I never meant to cause any problems. I aimed to steer clear of sowing any seeds of uncertainty in his thoughts or, even more troubling, inciting his ire. As I reflected more deeply, it became undeniable that I could no longer ignore the feelings Mr. Thomas was awakening in me. It seemed misguided, and I had no inclination to nurture it. Yet, a disquieting sense remained, hinting that his visits masked profound truths he preferred to keep hidden. What was I supposed to do? As the days unfolded, Mr. Thomas's visits became a delightful routine. With each visit, the all-too-familiar tide of discomfort and unease enveloped me once again. I tried to brush it aside, but it became ever more challenging to ignore. He had an enigmatic charm that quickened my pulse, leaving me bewildered by its source. I recognized the importance of being prudent, knowing that I had to keep the situation from slipping away from me. Yet, I felt that just beneath the surface, a subtle transformation was gently taking shape. I was oblivious to the profound depths that lay ahead of me. As the days transformed into weeks, the tension between Mr. Thomas and me grew ever more palpable. I had not yet confided in just about the unusual encounters I had with our landlord. A part of my soul quivered at the notion that he might misinterpret my intentions or, even more terrifyingly, that he could react with fury and disillusionment. Ultimately, I was simply trying to offer a gesture of goodwill, wasn't I? It was simply a light exchange of words. Is that all there is then? I recited that mantra to myself each time Mr. Thomas unexpectedly appeared at the house, trying to push away the growing sense of unease that was slowly taking hold. Nevertheless, the unease had transformed into an unmistakable force that I could no longer ignore. The memory of Mr. Thomas remained vivid, especially the intensity of his gaze as it locked onto mine and the fleeting touch of his fingers against the armrest of the couch during that unforgettable encounter. It seemed he was extending his hand, striving to create a connection that went beyond the typical confines of neighborly or landlord-tenant interactions. I kept returning to that moment in my mind, each memory heightening the tension within me. On a tranquil Tuesday evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen, carefully slicing vegetables in anticipation of dinner. Cooking had always been a source of joy for me, yet tonight it felt more like a weight than a comfort. My thoughts drifted to far-off worlds, an uneasy sense of foreboding tugging at my consciousness, as though the very atmosphere crackled with the anticipation of transformation on the horizon. As I delicately dusted the spices onto the chicken, the familiar chime of the doorbell resonated softly in the background. My heart danced within my chest. As I peered through the kitchen window, I caught sight of Mr. Thomas at the door, his inviting smile illuminating his features. Days had passed since I last saw him, and instead of feeling relief, a disquieting knot tightened in my stomach. With a gentle swipe of the towel, I dried my hands, taking a moment to inhale deeply before stepping toward the door. "Good evening, Mary," Mr. Thomas said with a bright smile as I opened the door. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." With a warm smile, I firmly replied, "Absolutely not." I stepped aside to allow him in, and he entered with a casual grace that implied it was the most commonplace gesture one could imagine. He glanced around swiftly, his eyes briefly lingering on the kitchen where I had been immersed in the art of preparing dinner. "The aroma in here is absolutely delightful," he said, his gaze lingering on the dish I was crafting. I accepted the compliment with a gracious nod, a flutter of uncertainty stirring within me as I contemplated my response. "It's simply a typical dinner. Nothing particularly special." "You always say that," Mr. Thomas chuckled, "but you have a remarkable talent for transforming the simplest moments into something truly extraordinary." The compliment was indeed pleasant, but it held a unique significance when it came from him. It was a different kind of admiration, distinct from the compliments I had garnered from friends or even from Jess. His gaze held a weight, as if he saw something deep within me that went beyond the simple needs of food or safety. A surge of discomfort enveloped me again, but I resolved to push the feeling away. "Thank you," I responded, brushing it aside with a graceful wave of my hand. "Is there anything you need? I assume you're here to seek information on a particular matter." Mr. Thomas's expression shifted ever so slightly. He seemed to take a brief moment before responding. "I would appreciate the opportunity to engage in a short discussion. It has been a while since we last shared a truly engaging conversation." To my surprise, our meetings had consistently been characterized by courteous interactions, But we had yet to delve into a more profound conversation. I had noticed his regular appearances nearby, but I never expected him to seek a deeper dialogue. A wave of anxiety washed over me, but I nodded nonetheless. Certainly, we can pause for a moment to enjoy each other's company. I led him into the living room, gracefully pointing to the couch, encouraging him to settle in and relax. I found myself seated across from him in the familiar chair that had become my usual perch during those evenings when Jess and I would immerse ourselves in our beloved television rituals. An uneasy silence settled over the room until Mr. Thomas shattered it, his voice imbued with a gravity I had never experienced from him before. He began his journey at a relaxed tempo. Lately, I've been immersed in profound contemplation about the essence of existence and the inevitable changes that gracefully unfold as time progresses. It is all too easy to find oneself caught in the repetitive patterns of everyday existence, drifting away from the deeper meanings of what truly matters. Uncertainty hung in the air as I contemplated the path he was choosing to follow. "I appreciate your viewpoint," I responded thoughtfully. "In the midst of life's chaos, it often proves difficult to remain connected to what genuinely holds significance." Mr. Thomas tilted his head slightly, his eyes searching deeply into mine. "Exactly. Yet, it is just as important to take a moment to pause and reflect, making sure that we are truly embracing life instead of simply going through the motions of our daily routines." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, rendering me momentarily speechless as I struggled to find the right response. My thoughts were shrouded in doubt as I contemplated his suggestion, and a fragment of my heart hesitated to reveal the reality. "Mary," he whispered softly, leaning in just a fraction closer to her. "It's challenging to express, yet from our very first encounter, an unmistakable bond has formed between us, a distinct connection that remains ever present in my mind. Time and again, I've pondered our conversations, the way you carry yourself. Your extraordinary spirit is simply ineffable, and my appreciation for you knows no bounds." A sudden constriction seized my throat, stifling my breath. His words enveloped her in a soft embrace, each syllable echoing with the significance of a profound truth. The way he spoke those words sent a shiver through my heart, though it was anything but a delightful feeling. A sudden wave of confinement enveloped me, casting doubt on my next course of action. My thoughts flowed like a river, seeking the perfect words. Anything that could dissolve the palpable tension that hung heavily in the air. I'm not sure how to respond," I murmured, my voice barely rising above a whisper. "I appreciate your thoughtful compliments, Mr. Thomas, but I must clarify that I am blissfully married. My heart is devoted to a husband I hold in the highest regard." He seemed completely unperturbed by my words. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on me for a fleeting moment, his expression an enigma that revealed nothing. "I understand," he murmured, his voice tinged with a subtle trace of regret. "Mary, it is my deepest desire to spare you any unease, but I find it impossible to overlook the feelings that dwell within my heart." His words coursed through me, a spark of electricity awakening every nerve ending. Though I had heard him express his admiration for me before, this moment carried a unique weight. In his gaze, there resided a profound depth and intensity that conveyed unspoken stories. A wave of trepidation and uncertainty enveloped me. This had evolved beyond the simple curiosity of a friendly landlord. It had transformed into a labyrinth of emotions, one that left me feeling unprepared to traverse its intricate paths. "I have no intention of creating any discord between you and your husband, Mr. Thomas said, his voice unwavering. "Yet I can no longer pretend to be indifferent to the undeniable attraction I feel for you. I felt compelled to share my emotions with you." Words slipped through my fingers. I opened my mouth, but the words slipped away from me. I found myself in a precarious situation, caught between the urge to shield him and the necessity of steering clear of giving him false hope. What steps should I consider in this challenging situation? How can I express to him that I am married and have no interest in pursuing anything outside of my relationship with Jess? Finally, I took a deep breath, my heart pounding with excitement in my chest. "Mr. Thomas," I declared with unwavering certainty, I value your candor, but I must be clear with you. I am happily married and deeply committed to my husband. Your kindness is genuinely valued. But I must emphasize that my interest is strictly limited to the parameters of a landlord-tenant relationship. A heavy silence enveloped us, and I caught the flicker of disappointment shimmering in his gaze. He lowered his eyes to his hands, then nodded with a thoughtful precision. I see, he whispered gently. I sincerely regret if my actions have brought you any unease. That was never my intention. I nodded, a surge of relief washing over me. The tension that once surrounded us seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a lingering sense of discomfort in its aftermath. The feeling remained, an undeniable heaviness that nothing could revert to its previous condition. Mr. Thomas's feelings for me would endure, no matter how much I tried to face them. He stood tall, and I followed suit, matching his movement with grace. Thank you for listening, he murmured, his voice soft and laced with a hint of sorrow. I will take my leave now and wish you a pleasant evening. Your boundaries are of utmost importance to me, Mary, and I want you to know that I truly respect them. I long to express the depths of my emotions to you. I forced a smile, striving to mask the inner turmoil that quietly brewed beneath the surface. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, I said with a warm smile. I eagerly anticipate the moment our paths intertwine once more. As he crossed the threshold, I paused for a heartbeat, my eyes tracing the emptiness he had left behind. A whirlwind of emotions danced in my mind. The events that had just transpired were utterly beyond my understanding. Even while being married to Jus, I found myself drawn into a captivating conversation with our landlord. What was unfolding? And why did it feel as if my entire reality was slowly unraveling at the edges? I gently shook my head, attempting to cast aside the persistent doubts that clung to me. I found it essential to focus on my life with Jus, to remember the passion and commitment we once cherished. Yet, an unwavering whisper within me hinted that this was just the dawn of something far more significant. After my conversation with Mr. Thomas, I made a concerted effort to set aside the entire situation from my mind. I was resolute in my commitment to preserving my relationship with Jus, and I had no intention of introducing any further complications with our landlord. Yet, despite my attempts to mask my feelings, they remained, stubbornly refusing to dissipate. The heaviness of guilt and uncertainty lingered, casting a shadow over my thoughts and leaving me in a constant state of reevaluation regarding the encounter. A few days later, Mr. Thomas graced us with yet another surprising visit. A flutter of unease tightened within me as the doorbell chimed, breaking the stillness that enveloped the room. Even though I sensed a lack of readiness for yet another challenging conversation, I recognized the necessity of addressing it head-on. I gently pushed the door open, making every effort to uphold my composure. Hello, Mary. He greeted me with a tone that was both warm and carefully controlled. I wanted to touch base and ensure that all is well with the house. I tilted my head slightly, conjuring a warm smile. Everything is in order, Mr. Thomas. Thank you for reaching out. He seemed to take a brief moment to gather his thoughts before continuing. I have been contemplating my earlier expressions with great depth. It was never my desire to bring you any unease. I recognize your boundaries, and I respect them wholeheartedly. I felt compelled to share the thoughts that have been occupying my mind. I held his gaze for what felt like an eternity, feeling the weight of the words he had spoken. At this moment, it was essential for me to take a stand. Here, uncertainty found no welcome. Thank you for your understanding, I replied. However, I feel it is necessary to be clear. I am in a committed partnership. My focus is entirely on my relationship with Jess, and I will not allow any distractions to disrupt our bond. I value the professional relationship we have, but that is where our connection ends. Mr. Thomas's expression softened, though a hint of sadness remained in his eyes. He tilted his head slightly, absorbing my words in quiet contemplation. I comprehend, he whispered gently. I sincerely apologize if I overstepped any boundaries. I took a deep breath, feeling a soothing wave of relief envelop me. Everything is absolutely fine. I would like to ensure that we are on the same page. He bestowed a subtle, courteous nod before making his exit. As he turned to leave, I lingered in the doorway, watching him fade into the distance. A tempest of feelings swirling inside me. A subtle ache resided in my heart, recognizing the importance of this moment. While a wave of gratitude unfurled for the boundaries I had so earnestly put in place. As twilight enveloped the room, Jess and I found ourselves seated at the dinner table, and in that instant, I felt a deep connection to the moment that had been absent from my life for far too long. The recent events weighed on my thoughts, but I recognized the importance of moving forward. I discovered a profound attraction to the core of what genuinely holds significance. The essence of my family, my steadfast devotion to Jess, and the deep love that intertwined our lives. "Is everything okay?" Jess asked, noticing that I appeared more reserved than usual. I flashed a smile, striving to dispel the lingering thoughts that clung to my mind like shadows. "Truly." Immersed in deep reflection, "Your return home fills my heart with happiness." He reciprocated the smile, his hold on my hand becoming a tender embrace. There's a soothing sense of belonging in the gentle return to the cherished embrace of home. In that moment, it became clear to me that amidst the tumult and complexities of human emotions, my purpose was strikingly clear. I felt a deep urge to protect the connection I had with Jess. With unwavering resolve, I was committed to ensuring that nothing and no one would stand in our way. Fully cognizant that, despite the obstacles that lay ahead, we would face them together, hand in hand.